Welcome to PodRocket. Today we have Rob Levin on with us. Hi, Rob. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Paul?
So Rob has something pretty exciting to share with us. So we're going to be talking about Agnostic UI. And, to wrap it up really quickly into one sentence, to me, it's like one UI framework that can fit with all of my frameworks. But I'm going to read the quote off of the GitHub page just to make sure we get it right. Agnostic UI is a set of UI primitives that start their lives in clean HTML and CSS. These standard compliant components are then copied to our framework implementations for React, Vue, Svelte, and Angular. So could you tell us a little bit about what you think Agnostic UI is and
Yeah,
a little bit about yourself? Yeah.
absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Okay, well, my name is Rob Levin, and I'm a UI engineer and also, I guess, design technologist. I do a lot of style guides, design systems, UI component libraries. And yes, Agnostic UI is a component library. It focuses on UI primitives, so like your really nuts and bolts UI components. And basically, as you read in the blurb, Agnostic starts with HTML and CSS. So it's not tied to any JavaScript framework. It's not tied to React, Vue, or Svelte. It's initially done in HTML and CSS. So it's probably useful to kind of quickly go through the process of creating a component, how I create a component in Agnostic UI. Say you have a button that'll start with a button.css and a button.html. Make sure that that's using semantic markup, that the markup is accessible, that the CSS has got it styled basically the way we want. And then that button.css will be used in all of those framework implementations. And so for React, we use CSS modules, which is sort of an implementation detail, but basically that button.css that we originally made the component in gets copied over with a little Node.js script into the React directory and is used for the React button component. For Svelte and Vue, it's very much the same. They both use single file components, so the styles will reside in the component itself. And basically that same sort of Node.js script will copy the contents of the button.css into those style tags using simple regular expression matching. So basically the idea is that one button.css, the contents of one style sheet is literally being used across the frameworks. And the reason why that's important is because once you've got your button branded to your company, you'd like to be able to use that same branded button, whether it's React, Vue, Svelte, or Angular. And that's sort of the value prop and the promise of Agnostic UI. And I even have a CSS tricks article, which I'll link to, which kind of does a very simplified version of building the button that I've been talking about.
Fantastic. So it sounds like to me, I can build something in Agnostic UI. And I could even make like a little UI library for myself and run with that for the rest of my career, no matter what framework I use, because it's going to be able to be ported over, provided it's implemented.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
And in fact, that's what I like to do is build design systems. And the whole project started because I had built a React only design system. And then just as that was kind of getting underway, I discovered that our admin was actually done in Vue. And then I met with our new Singapore team, which was offshore, and they were about to build a back office app, and they preferred Angular, and so I was asked, hey, can we use Angular instead of React? And I was like, well, the React component system is branded and really you're going to have to do it in React. And that was kind of a bummer. And I was also, I think, tinkering with Svelte at the time. And I realized, hey, why does a component have to be tied to a framework, especially if what's critical from a branding perspective is really just the CSS? And so having tinkered a bit, I was like, wait a second, I can copy these over and just have a constraint that each component only has one style sheet. And so I sort of slowly started working on it, and sure enough, did a couple proof of concepts, and sure enough, it's definitely doable.
Do you see any, core piece of functionality that people would expect to be easily available, not easily available because of the abstractions you have to make or the copying process? Or would you say that the majority of the functionality is still there? For example, could we get into a bit of open props and how those
Yeah,
power the components?
absolutely. So let's see. Open props, the library, Adam's library, or just
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, sure. So I did some experiments on my blog actually using the agnostic Svelte package, and one of the uh, libraries I experimented with was open props. And to back up a step, agnostic UI is platform CSS. There's no Sass, there's no post CSS. Those are great tools, by the way, but for agnostic UI, it's pure CSS. And so the only way to, of course, theme it is using CSS custom properties. So Agnostic UI exposes, a set of themable properties. And what I did was some experiments taking open props and kind of assigning those where agnostic became the kind of in-house property, sort of the way Adam sort of demos it himself. And then have a little switcher where you can switch between indigo, cayenne, blue, whatever. And then I threw in like a custom theme where it didn't derive from open props, but really any sort of CSS custom properties system could be thrown at this because they're just CSS custom properties. It's just
And
platform standard. Yeah.
would you define a CSS custom property sort of just like, a overarching class of properties that you could apply to a given style sheet?
Yeah. So CSS custom properties are a thing, I guess, that came about a few years ago, I want to say. And it's sort of, I think of the syntax like a dash, dash, and then property name. And then you have a colon and assign a value like you would kind of in Sass, but it's on the platform. So those can be changed dynamically at runtime, and the user agent or the browser will actually respect it. In fact, that's how a lot of light mode, dark mode switching is being done these days. You stick a class on the body tag, and then the CSS custom properties are essentially reactive. So then you can just have your brand that was blue now point to whatever the inverted color is. Maybe it's white or something against a background or whatever that is. And so using open props, getting back to using open props, we're just assigning those values from one to the other.
Right. Okay. So that kind of, for me, at least in my mental model right now, that's mimicking Material UI's different theming strategies where I can pass in the theme and then replace the value based on what that value might be.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
absolutely. I have an
So,
example on my blog, which I'll link to so folks can see a more visual.
okay. Great. Yeah. We can include that in the podcast description for anybody that's listening or viewing. You can go check that
Awesome.
out. So who should be using this, right, Rob? Like me, just designing things? Should it be big companies using this? Who would you say is your first customer or intended user, I guess, of this type of library? Because it stemmed out of your, professional need where you're like, wait, I see where this can go, but did it translate for that type of customer when you built it, or turn
Yeah,
out
I mean, in terms of today, it's a very early new library. So I think you'd want to be careful. Maybe if you wouldn't want to use it maybe quite yet on an e-commerce site or something like that. But side projects and things like that. But it's coming underway pretty quickly. So I think it's also in good shape. But in terms of who would use it, you or I might use it on our blog or our side projects. Companies could use it. The intent was as you said, it was as I was working, the vision was sort of like a design system. So say you're trying to create a design system from scratch. So that's something that I do, and I've been doing for a long time, and I definitely believe in design systems. And
What is a design system? Just to define it real quick.
yeah, well, so that's a loaded a loaded thing to define. So let me say a design system is usually a set of things. It'll be a UI component library, but also a definition of a bunch of patterns. It'll define the brand and identity. It'll talk about how content is used. So maybe I should avoid design system. Well, no, let's stick with design system. So you're a design technologist and you're trying to create what you can offer, which is say a component library inside a design system, and you're trying to do it from scratch. I've done this before, and it's very hard to get enough of these components built fast enough to where the business is not starting to get a little impatient and questioning the ROI. So one of the things, honestly, for myself was I wanted to have something sort of in the can, because another very viable way to build a custom design system is just to build it on top of Bootstrap or Material UI or Shocker or whatever, as you kind of alluded to. I just happened to I wanted to have my own that had a couple of things, because I'm picky, the way that I wanted them to be. And I also really like this idea of...
You're an artist,
Yeah, I'm an artist, right? Creative. I also like the idea of polyglot teams and having a polyglot code base. And most of the popular implementations of, say, Bootstrap or Material, Bootstrap, it's a CSS library. Most of the ports, as far as I understand, are done from community members, and they're not necessarily by the core team. I could be wrong. Maybe the React one is. I'm not certain, but that's not necessarily the reason for Bootstrap being, right? It has solid CSS based components, and then the community adds these things. So if you're going, or let's take Material, same type of thing. Say I'm going to Vue, and I know I like Material. Am I going to use Vuetify, or am I going to use Vue Material? They both seem to implement material design. Which one does it better? Which one has more bug fixes? Which one is tracking the material spec closer? I don't know. I have to go read blogs. I have to go install it. I'm not criticizing these different approaches, by the way. I hope it doesn't come off like that, but just kind of comparing and contrasting.
They're considerations that
They're
you
considerations.
need to keep in mind. Right.
Right. And so Agnostic UI, sort of the idea as a first-class citizen was, hey, we're going to really focus on semantic clean HTML and CSS, and then use that CSS especially to derive these different frameworks. So that if I'm working in React and I want to stay on brand and use Vue for my admin, I can, and it'll still have the same brand. And that's all through the CSS custom properties that I've chosen.
Gotcha. All right. That was a fantastic little overview about the motivation there.
Yeah.
So if I were to go try to use Agnostic UI this evening, what do you think would be, one of the biggest barriers to entry of somebody trying to approach this level of design versus starting with, maybe their company has a design system or they just use Material UI or something?
That's a great question. I think Agnostic UI is sort of similar in the camps of Material UI and Bootstrap, in that it does give you a sort of prefabricated component that you can then extend and customize yourself. So if you're not a designer, if I understood correctly, you're talking about like some people might be more inclined to define the aesthetics of your whole UI component library, and some might not. So you get a very nice off-the-shelf sort of button or carousel or whatever. Well, we don't have carousels yet, but tabs and whatever. It'll look nice. And then as you want to customize it, you'll use CSS custom properties to do so. kind of gets to the various ways you can do UI components. Today, it's very splintered. You have atomic styles, which are sort of CSS utilities based styles. So that kind of approach, you use CSS classes in the class attribute of your HTML. And people that use Tailwind or Tachyons would understand this approach. Very popular, works great. And then there's these camps where you sort of have a prescribed initial component that you can extend and override and customize. And Agnostic falls in that camp. Bootstrap or Material would probably be in that camp. And then you even have CSS and JS, right? So styled components where you're actually dictating how the styles should look in your JavaScript. And Chakra UI is a great framework for React if you happen to be in React for that. And there's styled components and other things that are popular. So all these things are viable and great approaches. It's sort of like, what do you prefer? And I think the reason why something like Twitter Bootstrap has been so popular over the years is it covers the broadest set of users, because you can customize it if you need to, but kind of as you unwrap it, it looks pretty decent.
It's very digestible up front. When
and I think it gets a bad rap because a lot of people are like, oh, this sort of has this Me Too Bootstrap look. But what people don't realize is with Bootstrap, you can import just one module if you'd like. You can override all the Sass variables. You can use their CSS custom properties. And their code's pretty clean. We use it at work, so I've had to look pretty extensively at Bootstrap code. But yeah, so Agnostic UI takes a different approach because we don't use Sass, but we still use CSS class chaining, or SMACS, if you've heard of that. SMA CSS by Jonathan Snook, kind of just a methodology. I might be getting into the weeds if I go down that road, but yeah. I'm a CSS nerd, so I can digress pretty.
What is the coolest thing in CSS that maybe it's not even practical, right? But it's just something that you love. There's one guy I saw who programmed Bad Apple in CSS.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and that was very impressive. That definitely piqued my interest. Have you seen? Is there a project or something that you're just like, damn, that was cool?
You know what? I'm in awe of all these geniuses that do that kind of stuff. I'm such a nuts and bolts plumbing kind of guy. I'm like amazed at CSS Grid. So it's like not very
pretty dope,
adventurous, but like, yeah. In fact, Agnostic UI does not supply a grid because grids are heavyweight. There's a lot of code involved with abstracting a grid in a CSS library. And so I had a Flexbox based one, and it was like 1,000 lines of code. I was like, I don't need this. I got rid of it. There are some Flexbox utilities. So Agnostic UI is not an atomic utility first framework, but it does provide a small set of utilities. And so you can use Flexbox through utilities. But otherwise, I use CSS Grid. And yeah.
What is a utility in?
Great question. So a utility is something like everybody's seen it, but they're not quite aware of what it's called. But basically, if you have a CSS class that kind of does one thing well, so say it says text capitalize, and you plop that CSS class on your paragraph and it capitalizes your text, or text uppercase, or font hyphen bold. So it's like literally defining one CSS property as you would in CSS. And usually they apply important because the idea is if you've applied a utility, you really want it to override anything else. So, so those usually get important. And the idea of designing or applying an atomic system is you sort of assemble these different utilities, these individual classes together. And, just like in CSS, if you apply 5 or 10 of them, all of a sudden you've got a really nice card and it's got a drop shadow and stuff. And I also think that people that are proponents of this. It's like it's different than inline styles because you do have sort of a rhythm. So if you're applying spacing using something like Tailwind, you'd at least have some sort of a rhythm to your spacing, and there'd be a rhyme or
Mhm.
reason. You know what I mean? But there's big criticisms of it as well, which I won't get into
Right,
because I'm not
yeah.
here to
When it comes
to
to
get into
front
the
end,
holy wars of.
there's a lot of opinions that are easy to find on the internet,
Oh yeah,
very quickly. So, um, and well, just for the record also, we heard it from the man himself. Use CSS Grid, guys. Like, it's
right.
really great. It's very powerful. You can do a lot with it. I've always wondered when I've used Material UI Grid why I was doing so, because it could have been done in 6 lines of CSS Grid, but alas, it exists. It does have
Yeah,
some extra stuff, so
CSS Grid isn't exactly easy to learn. You do have to kind of spend a weekend maybe just wrapping your head around it. But once you've got it, it's there for good.
Rob, I just wanna pick your brain. I don't know a lot about front end, and, uh, I like to make my own apps, you know what I mean? And they're always terrible, so but every time I do it, they're better, and I learn, like, everything I did wrong the last time, so it's, like, really great to hear it from a master, I guess, yeah.
Oh,
I'm a back-end person, so,
yeah,
but I guess we should, talk a little bit about, Agnostic UI and the roadmap, for anybody, listening who might wanna use it. So let's get back into that and, touch on what do you think the next big milestone for Agnostic is?
that's a great question. I mean, it's very early. I'd say the roadmap priority is increased component coverage. I've got about 25 components, and that's across 4 frameworks, so it's really more like 100. But I'd like to get that up. There's about probably 10 more that I need to really feel like it's component coverage complete. And that'll be like maybe a V1 pre-release or something. And then after that, I'll probably incorporate dark mode. Um, and otherwise, stability, bug fixes, edge cases, and just really making sure it's solid and is usable in a real application. I'd love to have core contributors involved to help shape the future of the project. I kind of feel like I have to get it underway and get it as far as I can myself. But eventually, I'd love to have some core contributors, especially if somebody wants to do the Angular stuff, because I'm not as keen on the Angular, but it's there. Yeah, so that's sort of the
So
roadmap.
right now, if I'm on the GitHub, it seems like there are 5 contributors. Are these people that have just kinda, like, posted things up and just been in and
Yeah,
out?
yeah. Basically, for the most part, it's like typos or documentation fixes. I have somebody who's supposedly going to do a port of Vue to TypeScript, which is kind of exciting. So folks are starting to roll in, but for the most part, it's been me working alone.
Gotcha. Is this, your first kind of framework that you've posted up, or have you done other ones?
Ironically, I did do a SAS buttons uh, project 8 or 9 years ago, I'd say, with Alex Wolf, and it was really popular for back in the SAS days. And now I'm not using SAS or PostCSS or anything, so it's kind of funny. I think SAS is great, by the way, but Agnostic UI is just very straight on the platform.
Yeah, and it's also one thing I liked about it when I went to the website is it's it's very in your face about, like, here are the things we do, you do it once underneath, and it feels like it fits very well into the front end, like, space right now at this point in the timeline, you know? Um, and hopefully, as time continues on, it'll help consolidate things.
Yeah, I mean, right now you've got these cool projects like Astro.build and 11D with Slinkity, where they're doing this thing where you can server render everything by default, but then use a little directive to say, hey, I want this little part client side or partially hydrated. I guess they call it the islands architecture. Well, Astro supports React, Vue, Svelte, and you can actually pull those in to a single Astro page. So I'm starting to do some experimentation. That's like a sweet spot for Agnostic UI. So you can imagine you're doing a site that lends itself to like a static site generator like Astro, and you use one team to do, say, the header and the sidebar, maybe as in React, and then like you have an image carousel and you do that in Svelte, and then an advertisement that's server-side rendered, and you do that in Vue. And that could all be kind of stitched together with Astro. So I'm pretty excited about how Agnostic UI could stand on the shoulders of the upcoming giants,
So it seems like on the roadmap, you really paying attention to, making sure this can be pluggable into this new landscape that's evolving with this modular style of having server-side rendered. We actually had the creator of Slinkity on a few weeks ago to talk about how his library worked.
I listened to it, yeah. I
Oh,
listened
you
to
did,
all
yeah.
your guys, or most of your guys' stuff, and you guys are pretty frequent, so that's a lot.
Yeah.
It was actually
Keep them.
accidental. Yeah, it was accidental. Like I hadn't really planned it. In fact, I have to give Austin Gill credit for coming up with the idea. I was talking to him on his podcast, and he was like, you could plug this in with astro.build and use React Vue and Svelte and Astro, and then you don't have to ship those frameworks down unless you opt in for client hydration. So you can imagine a world where you have maybe it's a React app already and you've got a lot of React developers. So you decide, okay, we'll ship some of the partial hydrated stuff in React, and then we'll use Svelte for these ad widgets that are server-side rendered anyway. And so, Svelte compiles itself away sort of, but like maybe Vue. Maybe you do these widgets in Vue. You don't have to ship the Vue runtime down. Or you could do a completely statically server-side rendered site and not ship anything down and use multiple frameworks. So it's pretty exciting to me.
And the way that's changing with the edge now too, things are becoming fast. It's really
absolutely.
So it's good to hear that you have your eyes on that for the framework. 25 new components, aka 100 on the way.
Right.
So that's
no,
good.
No. Wait. I meant 100 because there's 4 frameworks.
Right. Yeah. 25 on 4. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's a lot of, it's lines of code that got to be written. It counts as 100. It's 100.
Yeah. I'm doing a menu right now. Like what kind of UI component library doesn't have a menu? Like you have to have that, but like data grids or exotic date picker, date range things, like I love those and they're necessary. But for this framework or this library, I'm hoping to keep that in an add-ons repo or something, but not in core.
Right.
There's only so much of me to go around. I want to see my kids on the weekend, my wife,
Yeah, those are good goals.
Yeah, absolutely. If I don't hit them, I'll hear about it.
All right, Rob. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk to us about Agnostic UI. We'll definitely be providing those links that we've mentioned during this session below for anybody interested, not only to your blog, but also to the repo for anybody that wants to check it out, maybe contribute, look if it's something for you. Is there anything else you'd like to point our viewers to, Rob?
No, in terms of like shout outs, I kind of shouted out Austin Gill, so I'll kind of go with that. He's a really awesome front end developer and thought leader. He's the author of Utensils and Bedrock CSS. So that's a shout out. But otherwise, okay. Agnostic UI is pretty easy to find. I did get the domain AgnosticUI.com.
Heck yeah. That must feel good,
Yeah. Yeah, I finally bit the bullet. I was like, well, what is it, $10? I better just go do this.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and we'll see you around.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Kate.